Okay, we
Okay, we started recording.
to see Donald Trump.
Yeah, I was gonna say Trump or Ivanka.
You could all put it on mute because I started recording.
Okay, let me put it up. Turn it off.
Donald Trump.
Yeah, I was gonna say Trump or Ivanka.
You could all put it on mute. Okay, good morning, Hemshech Ayin Beis. It's all based on Hemshech Ayin Beis, even though we've been learning in Tafresh Sadik Dal, which I've explained all the time, on pages 1147 through 1149. We're actually now at the bottom of 1148 and 1149, as seen through the eyes of the next Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, who in 1933, the corresponding year to Tafresh Sadik Dalad 5694, as it was the custom by many Rabbeim, they would often repeat a mimer that the predecessor said, but with their additions. Here, there's an elaborate amount of additions, which we're learning. That's why we decided what we'll learn is Ayin Beis, then go to the Frierdiker Rebbe as he cites the Ayin Beis and explains it. So that's just some of the technical aspects of this. On the content level, let me just sum up where we are. We're definitely dealing with the highest levels, all the way pre-Tzimtzum. As soon as you hear pre-Tzimtzum, rest assured you're dealing with levels that are beyond us completely, because the whole purpose of the Tzimtzum was to allow for existence like ours. So talking about pre-Tzimtzum is in itself a contradiction, because how could you talk about something that doesn't allow any room for you? In other words, it would be like you can't see God and live. Even though this isn't Atzmus, but it's definitely the levels before the Tzimtzum are all levels that are pre the Tzimtzum, which concealed the lower levels of of divine consciousness, to allow our existence to emerge. And yet, we speak about it because, number one, God wants to reveal that part to us. There's a Torah from the Alter Rebbe on the Pasuk Ata Hareis Ladas, which the Pasuk which we just read. Ata Hareis Ladas. So it says, Ki Hashem hu Elokim ein eid milvadeh. It's the first Pasuk we say Simchas Torah before our kofis. So what does the Pasuk say? Ata Hareis Ladas. So Alter Rebbe teaches that Ata Hareis Ladas, you, Adu Atzmus, Ein Sof, Atzmus, chose to reveal yourself to us, that we should know you. In other words, if God did not make that choice, we would be able to extrapolate that there are levels higher than our existence. We'd be able to extrapolate that nothing creates itself and that everything that exists has a divine energy. We would be able to go, but how far could we go? If it was pure human rational logic, the way we were created, we can go, but not necessarily go to the deepest levels, because the deepest levels, by definition, that's God. So in addition to whatever effort we can make from the bottom up, God also revealed himself because he wanted a relationship with us. He wanted not just a relationship through faith, ladas, ata reis ladas, or like the operative pasuk verse that we're learning here in Ayin Beis, which all this is explaining the pasuk v'yedaita hayom v'shavesa levavecha ki Hashem hu Elokim b'shamayim u'mal v'aretz mitachas einoid. These are two psukim actually in Parashat V'eschana that we just read yesterday. Both these psukim, Einoid Movadia and Einoid. Not going into now the difference between them, but both of them have the word das, which means, interesting, it doesn't mean just faith. It means to know. So Ata Reis Das. So besides our effort, as much as we can reach, God also revealed himself. But the interesting thing is that it's sometimes hard to distinguish what we reach on our own and what God embedded in us. Because remember, we were created in the divine image. So not only does God reveal levels, he also wired us in a way that we could reach levels that are very high. So we'll discuss over time which comes from us, which comes from above, and then how they've joined together, because that's obvious interface is that they join together, because we don't want it just on God's terms, that God. But he aladas means that he gave it to us in a way that we could understand. So that, if you think about it, really doesn't say it explicitly, means that it's revealing to us things that are higher than our own capacity, which includes pre-tzimtzum. So that's point number one, that pre-tzimtzum is because we're being told what it is. Point number two, what I just said, is that we were wired that way. That's why we also function in that fashion, because God made the decision. He's going to create us in a way that has a progressive structure of how things move from etzem to expression, from the essence of something to its expression, from producer to product. And that would mirror how God himself or godliness manifests also in such levels, so we can relate to it. So if you see throughout, we've been learning the examples, building a home, any particular desire that a person has. So that is what we're addressing right now, is that process, the process. Now, that's point number one I wanted to make. Point number two is this, that at the same time, we have to always qualify that this is pre-tzimtzum, which means even though, yes, God is revealing this to us through the Rabbeim, through Chassidus, and that way we could have some understanding of it to some extent, but we have to also keep the understanding includes the qualification that is pre-tzimtzum. We should never forget that. Just because just because this was revealed to us, doesn't mean suddenly you're what they call chaver lap, you're suddenly God's partner. That takes avodah. So this is being told to us what the levels are. Then there's a whole other part of recognizing the humble recognition that this is not us. You know, we barely can make it out of asiyah chumris to asiyah ruchnis, let alone to levels like this level. Like I've always said, the Alter Rebbe would tremble when the word atzilus was used, and atzilus is far lower than these levels. My point is that at the same time it's revealed to us, doesn't mean suddenly we say, hey, I'm right there, right side by side near the divine throne. It means you have access. You know, I just heard a word the other day, a very interesting word, which I want to chazer over. I heard it from Rabbi Yisrael Friedman, all of Shalom. So when the Rebbe Rashab was saying the Hemshech Tafri Samach Vav, which in a way precedes Ayin Beis, well, not in a way, it was said a few years earlier, 6 years earlier. So it was to that point, Samach Vav was the deepest Hemshech. Later, the Rebbe, we know that Ayin Beis would be considered even deeper than Samach Vav. But when he was saying Samach Vav and he said the Maimer Mikne Rav talks a lot about the Eved Poshet, a person, a servant who's completely dedicated to his master with complete pshittus, sincerity, honesty, wholesomeness. There's an Eved Neman. I'm not going to go into the details. So someone asked the Rebbe Rashab that the Rebbe is saying these Maimorim for the Bochnim and for Younger Light, whoever was there. But are they shaykh to this Aveda? Are they shaykh to this? I mean, this is levels that are beyond most normal people, regular people. So the Rebbe Rashab answered the following. He said that what is the difference between a behemoth and a human being, an animal and a human being? An animal walks on all four. It looks down at the ground. It doesn't even think of turning its head up to look into the sky. That's not the way it was created. That's not its role. A human being has the capacity, walks upright, the capacity to look up, and we do look up. I'm explaining it a little more. He didn't say that expression. So a human being looks up, doesn't mean we can reach heaven, but we know there's a heaven. So when you're learning these things, you may not be able to reach it at this point, or at least reach it to a certain extent on your level, but you know there's something beyond you. And that awareness itself is already something. This is a common understanding when you learn Chassidus. So someone says, I don't hold by all these levels. So the first answer is you need to know they're there. You need to know there's a heaven. You need to know heaven is beyond you. And it's fine to understand that's something that's not easy to access. That alone is the beginning of the Aveda. Then you do your part. You know, everyone has their Aveda. We're not asking one person to be like another. Everybody has their particular way how they reach heaven. So that's a general. I mean, there are a few other stories I would share. But I want to learn the topic, but just wanted to make that point. So it's not something that you can always necessarily access, but doesn't mean that. But it's a big recognition that you know it's there, and you see it, and you yearn for it, and you pine for it, and you're hungry for it. Samalach nafshi. That you're thirsty, you want to be able to reach. So that alone begins the process of being motivated to go there. The third point I want to make, and that brings us back to the actual themes here. Remember, Ayin Beis is the story of the interface. Interface means that the interface that I was just discussing between Ata and the human being and the existence, between Atzmus and existence. And for their interface to work, it has to be something that relates to us. or else it's not an interface, or else it's God's kol yochel. His ability, he can do anything he wants, but that doesn't achieve anything. So the interface requires a very elaborate and step-by-step ladder. You climb step by step by step by step. That's true Avodah. From time to time, you can leap. You know, we have Rosh Hashanah, you have Yom Kippur, you have Simchas Torah, you have days in the year that allows you to go a leap. But even then, the goal is to then integrate it step by step, which is, you can't get away from that, because to be internalized, that's the only way. Even if your teacher would say, I'm going to give you now a gift of so much knowledge, chassidus and so on, you may get it, but it will never have been yours. You'll never have earned it. So worthy won't be owned by you. So the point is that the steps are vital here. And that's what explains that they're not splitting hairs, the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe even further. It's actually helping understand the steps, because remember, we take life for granted. If someone were to ask you, when you begin your life and you don't yet have a desire for something, there's no rotzen, and then you desire something. Let's say you desire a home, you desire to get married, you desire to have children, different rutzenis, and I'm specifically using ones that are not necessarily based purely on logic. We'll get to that in a minute. So someone asks you, what's the process? You say, I don't even think about it. I wanted a home. I went and talked about it with my spouse. We decided we're going to buy a home. We're going to build a home. We went and looked at the different architects and contractors and planners, and we hired the right people, and they built us a home. You don't even think about all the steps, because why should you? You're not necessarily an analyst. You don't looking to understand the human psyche, how every step works. But when it comes to understanding God, on the other hand, we want a relationship with God. And when you want a relationship with something, you absolutely want to understand each detailed step. You don't just take it for granted. That's why I would submit it's hard to understand even the approach, because this approach is not something we've been trained to do, to go and dissect every step, how something goes from etzem nefesh into a consideration, into a deliberation, into a determination, which we'll talk about in a moment. So I'm just pointing out that this is like, in a way, new methodology. Most of us don't think this way. We think to some extent, everybody is a little intelligent person, analyzes how one thing moves to the next. I mean, that's really what science is about, how things evolve, how you get from one state to another state, how things transform. And therefore, there are experts in different areas. So I'm not saying this is completely foreign, but to apply this on this level, just pointing that's a very important point to make. So what is being discussed here? I want to step back a moment, because getting into all the details can be so overwhelming. It's vital to understand what he's really trying to achieve. Remember, the whole thing began with a discussion of Das Elyon and Das Tachten, understanding the perspective from above, basically how divine consciousness looks at existence, and how existence looks at divine consciousness. Das Elyon, Das Tachten. We learned actually more that in the divine itself, there's two levels of divine consciousness, how the divine relates to existence and how the divine is removed from existence. To explain that, he went into a whole discussion of Yesh, Ayin, and Yesh, that everything in existence and beyond is structured with a source, a Yesh Amiti, we'll call it Atzmus, the absolute true reality. On the other end of the spectrum is the created existence, which is us. And in between is a channel that connects them. That channel is called Ayin. Generally means Oyer. That's the Oyer from Ein Sof, that comes from the Etzem, from the Yesh, Hamiti, and channels that energy into the Yesh HaNivra. And that's also the bridge between the two. Now, he broke that down further into two levels of Ayin. One that relates to Atzmus, to the Yesh HaMiti, is called Ayin HaMiti, and one that relates to the Nivra, Yesh HaNivra, the Ayin that relates to Yesh HaNivra, which means it relates to existence. Basically, two levels in Elokus. We're going to learn what these two levels are, which is exactly what we're learning right now. What are these two levels? Is it Sevav Kalalman and Mamala Kalalman? Is it in Mamala Kalalman itself? Is it higher than Sevav Kalalman? And the answer, my friends, as we'll soon learn in the next weeks, because he's developing this, all the above are correct. There are actually different ways to interpret the two levels of Ayin. The first way we're learning now is the highest levels. What's going on, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, in the early stages of so-called the desire for existing arising. Allah b'ritzene. Now again, immediately you'll jump. What do you mean Allah b'ritzene? Why does God, what arises? What suddenly sparked it? The answer is that we said God, Atzmus, does not need all these levels, but he made them in a way that he can then structure us in the mirror image, reflecting of that, the level, so we can relate to it. It's all about the relationship. There was no relationship. God just says, I want existence, and that's it. You don't need Tzimtzum, you don't need Lifnei Tzimtzum, you don't need Atzilus, Ak, Atzilus, Ak, Akudim, Nekudim, Atzilus, Bri, Yitzirasi. You don't need anything. You don't need spheres. But what kind of existence would that be? It would not be existence at all what is right now. So we never will know why God shows of all his different ways to do it this way, but he did choose this way. And this way is, there's a thing called logical progression. Things travel from level to level and get diminished. And the whole structure of existence is based on hierarchy and based on ischalkus, division, the diversity, I should say, and division of levels of time and space. Existence, as we know it, is time and space. Time and space, by definition, means structure. It has to have a past, a present, a future, even conceptual time and conceptual space. So bottom line is, that's the way it's created. And therefore, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, yes, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, God also orchestrated that it should also, kavyachol, so to speak, have levels. They're, as I discussed at length, they're not actual levels as we know them. They're in God's plan, so to speak. He's developing these levels in order for us to have something to hold on to as we discuss and relate to God and to the divine consciousness, pre-Tzimtzum divine consciousness that is beyond all of existence. So in general, here's what we've learned so far. That the first step from Yesh Amiti, the first step is called Ur. Ur. Ur is the best way to explain, best mashal, best example to give. As in Samach Vav, he uses the word B'zeh chidush admunish maseden. This is a chiddush of the Alter Rebbe, not the concept of Ur. You find Ur in Kabbalah, but the meaning of Ur. That Ur is the best example of something that is not Atzmus, but nothing but Atzmus. I know it sounds like a contradiction, but it's not. Because Atzmus is beyond Ur. Ur means expression. Ur means revelation. Ur means something manifesting. So Atzmus is obviously beyond all that. So Ur is the first built to Metzias Nimtza, from a non-existential reality, which means a reality of Atzmus that is beyond anything we can ever relate to, because he doesn't have to manifest. His existence is one that must be, is one that Metziusim Atzmuse, that its existence comes from within itself, and therefore it's a built to Metzias Nimtza. It's nothing that we can compare to. There's nothing we have that can say is similar to that type of existence. That's why God is God, and we're not God. But since God wanted a relationship with something that is existential, is Metzias Nimtza, so to jump straight to a Yesh would be, again, too big of a leap. They would never have a way to connect. So God innovated, if you wish, the thing called Ur, what we call Ur. What is that? That the built in Metzias Nimtza has moved into Metzias Nimtza, but it is so bottle, it is so selfless and so shapeless and so no identity of its own. It's completely Ur. All it is here is to reflect the source. To the point that we even use the word, you can't even call it a Hamshach and a Gili. You could say it's a step after Atzmus, but you cannot call it within itself. It's still not expressed. It's still not going anywhere. All it is the first step. Basically, it's like saying, just to use not an accurate example, the sun is an etzem hamoed, and then the sun determined, the sun obviously doesn't have a determination. That's why I'm saying it's not a good mashal, that I am going to give off light. But the first light that the sun gives off doesn't give off light. It just creates the concept of light. What is the concept of light? That in the sun, there's the power to give light. But here, there's an actual manifestation of what's called Ur Atzmi. We learned also that there's a higher level. There's God's capacity to give off light. That's why I'm qualifying. What I just said has to be broken into two. The capacity is a yechelis, that he called Ur HaKol Batzmusei Mamish Shmoy HaKadman. I'm just pointing it out in case you're halting cup, you want to keep all the levels going. Okay, this is Ur Atzmi. Then comes another level called Hispashtus Ur. Now the Ur has kavyachol, I say kavyachol, so to speak, is now beginning to have a function. Its function is going to be to manifest, to be revealed, and to extend. Because if you stay by atzmi, what you have is, yes, you've moved from atzmus to a metzias nimtza. You have an existential, so-called divine manifestation, but nothing else. It's not directed toward creation, toward existence. All it is that first step, which is like serves as the interface between atzmus and everything else. So it's important to have, but it's not an active move. In a way, I don't want to compare it to later. We're going to talk about Ratzon. There's a level of Ratzon like that, but there's a certain similarity only in the language. It's obviously a very different level because it's shapeless and so on. His Pashtus Se'er is already an Er, where from the Etzem Er has now manifested in a way that's going to begin to relate to another. In this Pashtus Se'er, we can say the language that he said, diminishment. This is already subject because it's not atzmi. So therefore, it's subject to levels. I did wonder in previous classes whether atzmi is subject, but he clearly said it's not because it's like the etzem. But it's still something that you must say that the atzmi relates to this pashtus because it's definitely the step before. But I don't want to analyze that right now. Let me just move on to where I want to go. So now you have ispashtus se'er. Ispashtus se'er means, so to speak, like the light outside of the sun. So it's already now beginning a functionality, but there's going to be many stages in this. So the first stage is Ola B'Ritzene. In this will arise a desire. So now we're talking another level. In the Ispashtus se'er will arise a desire for existence. Ola B'Ritzene, he says that clearly. The word Allah immediately tells you there's a stage before the Allah. Allah means it arises. Now, again, this is not in time, it's not in space, because none of that exists. It's not even beyond time and space. It's purely language for us to be able to understand that God is helping us understand a process. So it's a process. Okay, Ola B'Ritzene, and as you all know, these things are happening all the time simultaneously. Atzmus, Atzmi, Spashtus, Ratzon, Ola B'Ritzene. Okay, now in this Ratzon, this is where we're at right now. What we're in the middle of discussing is what is this desire? And what stages does this desire go through all the way to the point that God is ready to build a universe, to build existence. Remember, the building doesn't happen till the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum is the first step of building existence. But pre-tzimtzum, what are the stages that it goes through? So in general, there are two levels of ratzon. That's what we've learned. What he called ratzon, koyach ratzon and ratzon, which means the power of desire and desire, or the hidden ratzon anelam and ratzon agoli, the hidden and the revealed desire. Briefly, these two levels, one is a determination that one makes. I'm using now the mashal by us, and then we'll apply it back to godliness, lifnei tzimtzum, before the tzimtzum. One is a determination that this is worthy of desiring. But it's not considered yet a true ratzon, because ratzon has the word sinner in it. Ratzon is made up of the letters sinner, a channel. A channel indicates some movement. This is not a movement. This is a determination. So yes, it's a movement in relation to the etzem nefesh before you desired, because Ola B'Ritzene, something now has emerged, something was inspired. But it stops there. It could take many years until it moves to actual pursuing what he calls hatoyev amshacha, an actual being drawn to and pursuing the objective of the desire. So those are two levels of ratzon, and we explained that at length in the previous mimer. Again, I'm summarizing. I'm not going through all the discussion back and forth, back and forth. In this mimer, where we are now, and we're on page. Where are we on page 81? He begins and says that's in general. When you break it down further, there's three levels. And here are the names for them. Ratzon HaKlali, a general desire. Ratzon HaPrati, a specific desire. And Ratzon HaKodum, a prior desire. Let me tell you right now what they mean, even though he hasn't said it, but we got the preview already from Ayin Beis. Ratzon HaKlali relates mostly to Koyach HaRatzon or Ratzon HaNelam, when the first of the two. What is that? That is a general desire, and we're going to break that desire down to 3 levels itself shortly. Ratzon HaGoli is the Ratzon that is actively pursuing, and Ratzon HaKodem is Hashara B'Kayach. You're not just pursuing it, you're already envisioning the details, and you're estimating and allocating resources and preparing for the final step prior to the actual creation. In the example of the artist, and the same thing as the example of a home, the artist, the first step is that he has determined to become an artist, but there's no specifics. The second step is specifically pursuing to be the actual artist and start drawing, and there's details in that. And that's the step 3, that he allocates the resources, the different paints and colors and so on, ready to stand by the canvas to begin. So everything before the moment that the Ratzon becomes a Ratzon complete manifest, meaning that this Ratzon is beginning the production, is called Ratzon HaKodem. Everything is ready now. But prior to that is a Ratzon that's pursuing it, and prior to that is a determination. Those are the 3 general levels. Now, in explaining this, the Frierdiker Rebbe went now to analyze this further. The Rebbe Rashab says what I said till now. What the Frierdiker Rebbe adds is an analysis, an explanation of what this means. What is this Ratzon HaKlali? So he says the following, and I'm just summing up again. He says that there are 3 things: Heskem, Shak V'Tarya, and Hachlota. Those are the 3 words he uses. We've come to translate them. I think the best translation so far I have is consideration, deliberation, and determination. That the first step is considering the nefesh up till now. And I keep qualifying when I say up till now, it doesn't have to be time in concept, in inyan. Up till now, the nefesh has been a self-contained, completely isolated entity. It's an etzem. It doesn't need anyone. It doesn't need anything. It doesn't need stimulation. It is what it is within its own essence. The etzem nefesh. I'm going to explain this in a little more with an example soon. I just want to spell this out. So if you leave the etzem alone, just like it is with atzmus, it's a good mashal for atzmus, then nothing happens. Atzmus is intact, completely self-contained, doesn't need anything, and that's that. And obviously, etzem nefesh is not atzmus to the same extent, but relatively speaking, the human being, if you lived on the level of etzem, you wouldn't need relationships, you wouldn't pursue relationships, you wouldn't be interested in anything. What would you be doing? Well, I don't know exactly if you'd be doing anything. I don't know what etzem does, but definitely it's a state that is beyond expression. Etzem bilti mispashet. It is what it is. It's a core. It's the core essence of a person. Obviously, we can't really imagine it because we also have a spashtus. We're not atzmim. We don't remain there. We were created to have faculties and reveal and express and have relationships. But in atzmus, it's very clear that it's completely self-contained. Why? We don't have a why because there's no why. Why nesava kadosh baruch hu? As the Alter Rebbe says on the Taiva, is no question. This is just an atzmus dika thing to have a dira b'tachtenim. There's no why, there's no explanations, but that's the fact. Chassidus sometimes says, farvos meves nish farvos or meves vos. We don't know why nesava, but we know what. We know he desires. Again, the word desire, nesava, has to go in all the qualifications because in atzmus, it's not even a rotzen, it's not even a tainug. Even the word taiva is only it's only a word we use because it's the closest thing that we can use to a supra-rational desire. You know, when you say someone has a taiva, you don't have to have any explanation. Someone said, why'd you do that thing? I had a taiva. Obviously, in many cases, the taiva is not necessarily a healthy one, but let's say a healthy taiva, because taiva is the closest word to explain that. Anyway, again, I don't want to digress. I'm saying it also only because to give the fuller picture. So atzmus on its own, that's it. However, there's a process that began because atzmus, in its atzmisdika way, wants to have a dira b'tachtenim, a relationship with another that would be a dira b'tachtenim. So, therefore, what happens next At some point, you need to have a state that is completely not relating to the other, because as I said, in a good interface, if you want Atzmus to be reflected, you need to have something in Atzmus that is not going to identify with the object. It can only be something that relates to the Etzem. That comes back to Atzmi that I said. That's the value of the Atzmi. It's an interface because on one hand, it's moved to Metzias Nimtza, but on the other hand, it is nothing but reflection of Atzmus. So now let's move back to the Rotzen. We said after that comes a state of Ispashtus Se'er, and in that arises a desire. What was before the arising of the desire was the Etzem. Now, it's not Atzmus, we know that, it's more Etzem Ha'er. Or even in Ispashtus Se'er, maybe the Etzem of Ispashtus Se'er. I don't know if that level exists, I just was thinking about it now. But let me go back, so what is the Nefesh? I'm going back to the Moshel. The Nefesh is self-contained. So now it needs to begin to relate. So there's a thing called Heskem. Heskem HaNefesh. The Nefesh has agreed. We use that word, Heskem is also agreed, but I think consider is even better. You can use both words. Has now is agreed to consider, I'm using both together. To do what? To begin to consider a relationship with another. This level, he explains, is a level that is not, its objective is not its focus is not on the objective of the desire. I'm just going to use the words. Its focus here, these words, very important words here. Misyaches haskama misyaches yesod al mayim de matzav hanefesh b'kamoishu misyaches al adover sha'ola b'askamase. So what is this heskem? What is its role? Its role is simply, and I'm going to just use a little creative language just to make it more understandable. It's the Etzem HaNefesh exploring the possibility of a relationship with another. It's not, the other is not the focus now. Doesn't care about the other. Its focus is what is the Nefesh looking to do? So the Heskem is not about how it's going to get done, it's what? Considering the idea, the concept, the principle of a relationship. So its focus again is on the Maimon de Matzav HaNefesh. So what has the Heskem done? He said, it's taken the Etzem HaNefesh outside of its shell, its self-contained Atzmizdika shell, and now, which is completely mufshit or muslal, completely removed from any relationship, and has now at least entered the realm of possibility. He says, yes, nesinas mokim. I'm using words we learned just to, what's the word he used? What was nischadish? Nischadish is, let me see. There's now a consideration exploring the possibility. This is what the Heskem does. But now comes a Shaka V'Tarya. Is a back and forth type of discussion in the Ratzon itself, in this level, is this something that should be determined? Yes, that we're pursuing it. The Nefesh, should I pursue this? Right now, just a consideration, like someone coming to you and saying, I have an offer for you. I want to hire you. And you have a job, and you listen. You say, I'll consider it. You may not do it, but you at least consider leaving your existing position to move to another position. That's not such a good example because you already had a position. But imagine you had no job. You're completely self-contained. You're sitting and learning Torah all day. And then someone comes and offers you something, I'll consider it. Then comes Shaka V'Tarya. Shaka V'Tarya means a deliberation. Yes, no. We made it very clear. It's not a logical deliberation. I should have said this earlier, but I'll say it now, because we're not talking about a desire that's based on Tam V'Das. He made that very clear much earlier. The previous Maimer, he made it clear, it's not a Ratzon al pi Tam V'das, which means it's not logic that's dictating your desire, it's desire dictating logic, actually. So we're talking about Ritzenis Atzmim. The examples for that would be the love of a parent, a child, the desire for a home, the desire for a spouse. These are examples of Ritzenis Atzmim. We're wired, the soul, the Etzem HaNefesh is wired with these desires. However, up till the Ola B'Ritzene, till it arises, it could remain dormant for a long time. So the consideration is basically now has come the time to consider. The Shakar V'Tarya is not a logical one. It's based on whatever factors. I saw someone wrote on the WhatsApp group, I thought it was a very good way of putting it, that there are other factors that would determine why somebody would get inspired and why they either would determine to, why someone would consider getting inspired to consider a relationship and why they would either pursue it, not pursue it is not the good word here, why they would make the determination yes or not. It can be different factors. It can be intuitive factors. It can be resonating factors. It can be, you can consider buying or having a home. And then, you know what? It goes back in a dormant state. You considered it and then nothing happened. So point being, a Shakar V'Tarya weighs in the Ratzon itself. This different pros and cons, I guess. I don't know if the word pros and cons is the right word. But upon him, then comes step 3. And that's the determination. He calls it hachlota, a hechlet. That you come to an absolute determination. This is what I want and desire. And that really is the end of the Ratzon Klali. So basically the words he used, I want to use another expression. He said like this. Haheskemu rak hascholos haratzon klali bilvad. And then comes the Shakar V'Tarya, the deliberation. And then comes Ba Achlota Shu Safa Ratzon Klali. The Achlota is now made a solid determination that will not waver, that will not go back on. This is now a determination. I desire something. However, what is it not? It's not an active pursuit. You're not being drawn to it. You just made a firm desire, a firm resolution that this is what is desire. So here, the focus, one second, I want to just see one line here. Yeah. A little later, next page, he's going to say, the Heskim relates to the Nefesh. The Heskim is about the Nefesh exploring the possibility of a relationship. And the Hachlota relates to the relationship. It's a determination, I desire a relationship. However, it's not the next step level, Ratzon Agole, second level of Ratzon, which now moves the desire into a movement, into action. What does action mean? You're pursuing. There's actually being drawn. And this is going to lead, obviously, to Ratzon HaKodem, allocating the resources, and to ultimately fulfilling the desire. So this is a brief explanation of what we learned on page 80 and 81, the 3 levels. Now, there's more to cover here, which is the whole Mehusa Metzias thing. I haven't forgotten that. I did study this Shabbos. We had a long Shabbos, and I did go through it. So I feel I can give you a little overview on that as well. But I wanted to first deal with this because, as I said on Friday, it's vital to divide here and conquer. First, let's establish what he's addressing here. So, how does this reflect Lamaila, Lifnei Tzimtzum? Basically, what we have here is a very step-by-step, a very delicate and very subtle step-by-step process where things are moving from Atzmus to the object of the desire. In other words, if things remain in the Atzmi level, as I said, you're not going to have existence. Or I should maybe correct myself. You'll have existence, but completely on Atzmus terms. There won't be existence as we know it. If you have Ispashus air, you're beginning to have something that can relate. Then starts in the Ratzon itself, you have a Ratzon that's far more focused on Etzem HaNefesh. In this case, the Heskim, when God made the consideration. I'll explain what that means in a minute. Consideration, it's still just basically in Elokus itself, it's beginning to consider and give room in the divine Lifnei Tzimtzum consciousness for another. The Shakar V'Tarya is going to say later is B'min Nimlach, is where God is ready considering and weighing the pros and cons, if you wish, or weighing the different aspects of it. The determination is when God says, yes, we're going to create existence. Now you could say, from God's point of view, he needs to, what does that mean? In a human being, it makes sense. First you consider, then you deliberate, and then you conclude, and you determine. God needs us. This brings me back again to the initial introduction that I have to always point out. God doesn't need anything. There's no such thing as considering. Of course, he knows that he's going to determine, but he wants us to have a handle how to relate to God. In other words, when we do mitzvahs, when we serve God, are you relating to the consideration of God, to the deliberation, or to the determination? Not even talking about now the next level of Ratzon, where God is, where the divine energy is beginning to pursue and be drawn to it. But the point here is, you have here, and I've never seen it in such detail, in the highest levels of Lifnei Tzimtzum, you're beginning to see the stirrings of the initial way God relates to existence. And again, you could say, well, once God determines, why do you need to know that he considered? It's already been determined. Because we want to have we want to have a relationship to God as close to God as much as possible on his terms. Determination is already going more on our terms. Not as much as the Ratzon Gali, which is even more so. But the consideration is much more on God's terms. So now I'm going to explain it with an example that I did not give till now. Maybe I gave it, but I didn't really elaborate. I want to give an example. I'm going to talk about a relationship between two people who love each other deeply. Could be spouses, could be close friends, a very deep love. Now, we all know that every one of us has a certain element that's self-contained. What do I mean by that? Can you share the things that are the innermost atzmizdike feelings or experiences within yourself? We know there are a lot of things within us we can't even express. We can't express it, even to ourselves. It's somewhere very deep inside. It's on an atzmizdike level. It's just there. Once you say you can express it, you're already talking about some form of hamshacha, some some gili, even if it's the deepest secrets. Like when we say liba lepuma legalia, the heart cannot be expressed through the lips, through the mouth, through speech, because the heart is beyond words. Okay, but there are other ways to express it. You could express it through a hug. You could express it through a kiss. You could express it through a song. There are ways to express love that are not through the puma, not through your mouth. However, even that still is going to always be never the etzem itself. Now, it's hard to explain because I can't explain an etzem. I'm hoping that when I say this, you all know what I mean. There's a certain part that even with the people that are closest to you, it's not that you're holding a secret from them. It just, there's a certain existential loneliness, that you have. Even though people care about you and they love you and you love them, there's just who you are, your singularity, your individual self in the deepest place. So the question can be asked, can you have a relationship with that atzmis of you and another atzmi? Or is a relationship, even a profound one, on lower levels, meaning on the giluyim, on ispashtus se'er, but not on atzmi and definitely not on etzem? Good question, right? How deep is the relationship? So most people would say, who says it has to be all the way in the etzem level? There's nothing. It's not like I'm withholding or not trying to have a relationship there. It just doesn't connect there. Atzmi doesn't connect with atzmi. However, according to Chassidus, you could say atzmi does connect to atzmi, not through the etzem, but through the levels that come afterwards. So the question really is, then how do we deepen a relationship with each other? So let me go now to the other extreme. Many relationships people have are based on needs and based on mutual needs and mutual benefits. Take a business relationship. I'm talking now the other extreme. I'm moving from atzmi to a complete, I don't want to say superficial, but complete on the outer levels. You and I, we make a partnership. Let's both say we both put an equal amount of money. You are the one that's selling it. I'm the one that whatever it is. The partnership. Now, this partnership is not an atzmizdika partnership. It has conditions. If it doesn't work out, we can split up in a peaceful, nice way, a civil way. But the relationship is based on needs. You do your part, I do my part. We need each other. And therefore, it works or it doesn't work. If you go a little deeper, you could also have people who are more than partners. They're actually friends. They're friends. They care about each other, not just pure business. You can go even deeper. That could be your own child that you're a partnership, which is more than just on business. Even if things don't work out, I'm talking about even if it's healthy and good for the business. There's deeper connection. My point is, those are the relationships I just described are more outer level relationships. But let's say with someone that you really care about and love, a spouse, or a parent, or a child, or even a good friend. And it's not conditional based because you're giving me something, I'm giving you something in return. We're not talking about that. Because that is not necessarily, you'd say, a true ava atzmis. There, yes, as long as we are mutual benefits, we're together. We're talking about deeper. Now, let's talk about the deeper. You could say, my relationship with my spouse is not it's not a business negotiation. It's not like if I don't get what I want, I'm out of here. It doesn't work that way. There's an actual emotional connection, soulmates. There's something deeper. At the same time, it definitely manifests in things. A good marriage is going to be expressed in ways both people appreciate each other, they understand each other. If one person, God forbid, starts getting frustrated with the other, even if there was love, and there is love, but let's say on the functional level, there's incompatibility. You can't communicate. You get frustrated. You get anxious. When a crisis arises, and the couple cannot communicate well and how to deal with it. So suddenly now the relationship is being tested. Okay, it's a challenge. And obviously the goal is to correct it and make sure it works. But this happens, even with people who care about each other deeply. They may have different ways of dealing with things. Crisis brings out the worst and best in us. It sometimes pushes people to the limits, and suddenly you may not have the tools and resources that you had when things were going smoothly. So how deep is this relationship? It's being tested here. So here's the question. If the relationship is based on the things we do for each other, I don't mean in the business-like sense. I meant in addition to love, there's things that we understand each other. So then, if things are not working, it can really be a serious crisis. Because the relationship between them you're not relating to the other person, you're relating to their relationship with you. And if that relationship is affected in whether it's communication or in feelings or in other matters, that can be a challenge. But if the relationship between the two is on their essential level, we're connected no matter what. Even when things are not going well, we're able to access that connection, then you could ride through anything. I deal with this all the time. You see relationships that are taxed and pressured, especially these days, very often. And there are two ways this can go. God forbid, one way is the pressure is too much. It's like a structure. A structure can withhold and withstand a certain amount of pressure. But if it's too much, it starts coming apart at the seams. And you can't find deeper resources. Or the challenge is bring out deeper resources. I mean, take the story of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is like the story of our times now. What do I mean our times? I mean, Moshe goes up on the mountain on Shivasa B'Tammuz after breaking the tablets because they built the golden calf because they betrayed God. Right? 40 days, 39 days after Matan Torah. Shouldn't have other gods, and they built the golden calf. So they betrayed God in the most horrible way. Moshe, they deserve what they deserve, but Moshe does not give up. He goes back on the mountain and starts begging for forgiveness. Right now, Moshe is on the mountain the second time, through Tisha B'Av and through the 9 days and the Tisha B'Av, all the way to Elul. He comes back down, Rosh Chodesh Elul. He's not successful. God does not grant forgiveness. He goes back up a third time, comes back, Rosh Chodesh Elul, comes back 40 days later, Yom Kippur. Salachti kidvarecha, like we say in Kol Nidre, I've forgiven them as you've spoken. It's the greatest, holiest day of the year because Moshe prevailed. What did he prevail? That even a betrayal like that, of that nature, total adultery, complete violation of the relationship. Nevertheless, Moshe was able to dig deeper and find the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim that God gave him, and is able to elicit the deeper love that transcends even that. Obviously, with the condition that the Jews would do tshuva, and it doesn't mean this was not licensed to sin, but he was able to dig deeper. Basically, he went all the way to the essence of the divine, because God, not to the Giluyim, because the Giluyim that was severed. The Seder Ishtalshlus of the structure between the relationship between God and the people was severed because they did something horrible. It wasn't a small little matter they did. They were over on Avodah Zarah, which is one of the Yareg V'Yaver. It's not a small detail. It's the essence. If there's no connection on that level that I am your God, and you've chosen another God, the whole thing falls apart. However, he was able to find deeper connection. And therefore, that also allows us in relationships to find deeper. What is this deeper connection? So I'm going to explain it now with what we just learned. If the relationship between God and the people, or between spouses in the example I'm giving, is on the level of determination, the rotzen for the other, so that is a level that's a determination that is completely determined and is determined after a shakvataya. So therefore, it's a very specific determination that can ultimately be compromised in some way. If, however, you can connect to God in the consideration level is all about God. It's about him considering a relationship. So there, you're like, in a sense, going back to the engine room where you're relating to the God. You're relating not to God's relationship with you, but to God's considering his relationship with you. So in a way, you can reach there, you reach deeper there, the connection becomes a deeper one. Because you're not just connecting to God that has a relationship with you, you're connecting to the place where the etzem is considering a relationship with you. And that's a deeper connection than the determination, and definitely than the deliberation. That's one example I would use to apply this. So in other words, in our connection to God, it all comes down to, there are times when things are going smoothly, you don't have to go to these deeper levels. You go to the level, you don't even have to go to Ratzon HaGoli. You go to the fact that God created existence. He wanted us here, put us in place, and everything is going smoothly. But if you want a deeper connection, and at times you need it, because let's say when there's a crisis, the fact is we always want a deeper connection, but the crisis definitely compels us to seek those deeper levels. So then these deeper levels actually help us say, okay, you know what? I'm going to try to go all the way to the beginning of the whole process. When we say Rosh Hashanah, that every Rosh Hashanah, the whole world goes back and goes into a comatose state before Rosh Hashanah, every Rosh Hashanah, in order for God to renew the contract. And we have to elicit the Ratzon of Hashem to create the world anew. What are we doing? We're going back to the highest levels where there was only the consideration that you should go from consideration to deliberation to determination. That's somewhat of a way to explain a little the relevance of these levels. Now, I know I've been speaking a lot here without learning inside, but I felt because this theme here is so intricate, I have to develop it into develop it into understanding, because the Frierdiker Rebbe is very dense. So I hope this was helpful. Helpful to me, at least, to say it. So thank you for listening. And before I continue with Mehusam Metzias, which I'm going to address now, I want to just stop if anybody has any questions or comments on what I've said. And if not, we'll continue now, explain Mehusam Metzias, and then we'll learn inside.
Rabbi Jacobson.
Yeah.
You stopped, or it seemed to me that you stopped at Shach Levatariya, that this deepest relationship that we're trying to say in the time of a crisis, we go past Hachlata, we enter into Shach Levatariya, where we're dealing with the essence, but we didn't. I think you stopped before you went to Heskim, the deepest level. Was that on purpose, or can we access that deepest first stage?
I thought that's what I said, actually, consideration. I didn't mean to stop by Shach Levatariya. I meant to go to consideration, yeah. Yes, okay. The answer is yes. I meant to say that. Maybe it didn't come out that way, but I meant to say that you're going all the way to Heskim, and even deeper, frankly, but to Heskim for sure, yeah.
So the answer is, when you ask if we could go all the way to Etzem, that it has that uniqueness, singularity, that there's no such thing, that we can actually, our singularity can, individual singularity.
Okay, you're right. I didn't finish. Let me finish then. So through Heskim, once you get to consideration, from there you can move to the next level, which doesn't have expression altogether. Consideration is at least, like, sometimes I'll just use marriage counseling again. We sometimes meet a couple who are having challenges, and you see a lot of it happened, whatever crisis, betrayals, unfaithfulness, whatever it may be. And there's challenges, and you're trying to find, is there a spark that's still there? So often one of the best methods is, I said, do you remember when you first met each other? when you first, I don't like the word fell in love, it's one of these secular words, but when you first connected, when you first really connected, and very often, and this has happened more than once, if you can elicit that, some people start crying actually, because they cry sometimes to what was once and how much was lost. But sometimes you can actually access a place where the person first considered actually marrying the other. And if you can connect to that and retrace the steps from there to here with all the water under the bridge, it can be a tool. I'm not saying it's magic pill. Trust me, it doesn't work that easily. I wish it was easy. But it's something, because what you're doing is you're not going into discussing the relationship you have now. You're going to all the way to the point where you as a person made a decision. I'm going to consider this person in my life, this relationship. And it came from you, from your the innermost self. And then it began to manifest further until it became a full relationship. Now, I want to go backwards now. According to what we're learning, yes, I didn't finish the point, and I'm glad you brought it up. That once you get to consideration, beyond that, remember, is not conscious. Because before consideration is etzem hanefesh, that is not yet Hashedus. There was no inspiration. It would be like saying we're soulmates, but when did we discover we were soulmates? When we were 25 years old, whatever the age is, 30 years old, 22 years old, whatever the age is. And someone will say, were you soulmates before that? The answer would be, the way I'm connected with my spouse is such that, yes, I feel like we were connected long before, but we didn't know it. And especially when you learn Chassidus, it says soulmates, God decided long before you were even born. So basically, my point is that once you go through the levels of, let's call this Seder Ishtalshlis, Mamal Kalam, Eris and Kalim, and then you move to Ratzon, Makif, Pnimi, Makif. And in Ratzon itself, you move to the highest levels of Ratzon, which is from Ratzon HaKodem to Ratzon HaGoli to Ratzon HaKlali, from determination to deliberation to consideration, which is all things that we can at least hold on to some way, because there's essentially in the human process, we can remember those levels. Then comes a point that will connect you, since it's all in Oyer. Remember, the Ratzon emerged in the Oyer. That will connect you through the higher levels, even though they may not be conscious, but they will connect you to the highest essential levels, all the way that Etzem meets Etzem. Yes, that's the answer. Because remember, when it comes to Atzmus, Atzmus was Nesava, not Oyer. So you're really connecting to Atzmus, but there's no way to get to Atzmus if you don't go through all these stations, so to speak. So that's my answer. And the same thing in the personal level, that through the levels you get to, what happened at the end? Moshe was able to reach Hashem in the core essence, but he reached him first by going and saying, remember, you chose these people. You chose Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. You chose their children and grandchildren. So there was a choice. That led Hashem to reconnect on the deepest level, on the Atzmisdika level that precedes even the choice, if you wish, even the consideration. So that's the finish of the sentence that I did not finish, but I thank you for bringing that up.
Can I ask a second question, or is that too much?
You could ask, go ahead, it's not too much.
You said that Ola Beratzono happened in Ispashis or, if I was correct. So that would Ola Beratzono is not happening in Etzon, it's happening in Or Ayin Beis, or whatever you want, the level of the Ayin. So if that aroused there, that's after that. So it's really would seem to preclude a relation of being able to go higher than that, which would be into Etzem itself, because it's even before there was even a consideration of the creation.
So my answer, which we've spoken about, is based on a Sikha in Shmois, second Shmois Sikha in Likutei Sichos, volume 6, Chelik Vav, where he talks about the different relationships we have with God. And what the relationship with Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu has a difference to the relationship with the Ratzon Hashem, what you're asking really. So let me put it this way. I'm going to use an example from a lower level. So this asked the question, beginning of Samach Vav and other places. If the only way existence could exist is through the Tzimtzum, and means the whole Tzimtzum has to completely conceal the divine, and then comes a kav, and the kav is tailored according to the kalim of the containers of the makabel, of the recipient. So why didn't God just remove enough light and just leave a kav? Why did he need a complete concealment? He could have just removed all the Eir Abligvul and just left the kav. It says no, siluk. He removed, concealed everything, and then chazer v'hoyer, it returned. In other words, there was a space of silence before it returned. Why do you need the silence? Why didn't you just slow down the flow to the to trickle of a kav? That's the question asked. Exodus answers two answers. One is because if there was, even if it was a trickle, just a kav, it's still connected to Eir Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. It still would be too intense. And in order to have kalim, you need to have complete silence, or the kalim would never emerge. There would be too much light, even the kav. Now, once the kalim emerge, then you could bring the kav back. It would be the example I'm using is a teacher and a student. You could ask the question, why does the teacher have to conceal all his brilliance and be quiet before he starts teaching, which is the kav? He could just slow down. He's talking and talking, slow it down, get it down to Aleph Beis Gimel Dalet. The problem is it's still connected to his brilliance, and therefore it would be too much. You need silence. Basically, you need silence before the storm, if you wish. You need silence before the flow. So the silence allows the student to arrive. Student is now here, it's quiet, and the teacher begins to speak to the student on the student's terms. It's not on the teacher's terms, on the student's terms. The second answer Chassidus gives is because you want to be able, the kavanah of the tzimtzum, since is not just for the to allow for the kalim, you want to also have. Well, one second. Let me just explain the question. I had to elaborate more on the question. The question was, since afterwards the light's going to come back, so what did the tzimtzum accomplish? The first thing, it create kalim. The second thing is that something new is accomplished now. Not just that the kalim can now contain a kav, but now you can also have the Eir Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum that's even higher than what came down in the kav. Why? Because once you have a keli, the keli can expand and expand, and you can become as great as your teacher and even beyond that. So why am I saying this? To answer your question. There's no way to have an experience with Atzmus without first having an experience that is on our terms. If a person is a yesh, meaning a selfish, chumizdik, a crass, coarse, arrogant individual living in this world, and says, I want to have a relationship with the highest levels of Elikus, what's the answer? What are you talking about? First, you got to refine yourself a bit. So the first thing is that you have to become a little bottle, a little humble, and allow the Elikus that fits into your container. Then you grow and grow. It's on your terms initially. Slowly, as you become more refined and you learn more and more, you suddenly now can come to the teacher, or in this case, godliness, and say, I want to receive more. So you can receive more and more. Let's say, now let's move all the way to the Ratzon. You can receive all the way from the Ratzon, which is the desire of God to have a relationship with you. Now, can you have a relationship with God before he decided to have a relationship with you? The answer is yes. If you can connect with him on this highest levels of desire, where, like we said, consideration is only reflecting etzem. It's only that the etzem is considering a relationship. It's not about you. Once you've gone through all the steps where you got rid of the you, and you've become a keli to the elikus you can relate to, and now you're ready to shed the last element of ego and the last element of self, and without being annihilated, you then could enter into God's space because you are now shed your personality. Ratzon is still giving room for your identity. And Atzmus does not leave room for your identity. So if that happened in the beginning, you would be completely annihilated. But since you went through all the steps, like a student, learn step by step by step, now you can enter something completely on God's terms, and you don't have to be benefiting from it. You don't even have to feel an identity anymore, because you're now a keli for it, because all your years and all your work of self-refinement have turned you into a complete oir. Yesh has become oir, so you can enter into oir atzmi, which reflects atzmos. But it can only come through these levels. So the refinement of the yesh, till the yesh becomes like an oir, that's the way you get. So Ratzon is still not pure oir. Ratzon is already the oir that's relating to us. And higher than that is atzmus on his own terms. And you could only come there when you are completely shed of all your outer or your identity layers. To use the expression I've explained a number of times, when Moshe says to Hashem, Moses says to God, show me Hareini noch v'decha. Show me your glory. As it's explained, he wants to see God's face. So God says, Lo yireini adam v'chay. No person can see me and live. And then Hashem, God says to Moshe, V'ri'isa es achirai, uponai lo yiro. You will see my back, but my face you will not see. So the Rebbe, in a very powerful sikha, it was Tainus Esther, Tovshim Mem Ches. And then later we found this in Panim Yofis from the Baal HaFlaw. What was his first name? Rabbi Horowitz.
Pinchas. Rabbi Pinchas.
Pinchas Horowitz, yeah. A big Chassid, a big gone. So Panim Yofis on the table. So the Rebbe asked a few questions, and this will help understand this. He asks, first of all, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand that you can't see God and live. He didn't understand that God needs to tell him that. Second of all, since God rejected his request, why do we need to hear that he asked for it? We have to hear that God didn't accept what he asked for. And finally, if God is saying, I'll show you my face, my back, why does he have to rub it in and say, my face you will not see? You already said, Lo Yirayni Adam. You already said that no one can see me and live. And the Rebbe answered that the Pasuk is supposed to read like this. I will show you my back and my face. But my face you will see by Lo Yiro, by not looking. My back you can see by looking, because it's not completely me. It's only a reflection of me. But you want to see my face, you can see my face, but you cannot look, meaning it has to come with your complete bittul. That's how the Rebbe explained. And that's why the Pasuk says it all, because it's teaching us this lesson. So when Moshe first met Hashem, what was the first time? By the sneh, right? He sees the burning bush and sees and then he says it's not being consumed. He realized something. So Hashem said, look at me. And Moshe covers his face, he doesn't want to look. So the Gemara says that when Moshe said, show me your face, Hashem said, when I wanted to show you my face, you didn't look. Now that you want to see it, I'm not going to show it to you. So the Rebbe in another sikha once asked, what is this, a tit for tat? What is this, a game? Like, that when I wanted to show you, you didn't look. So now I'm not going to show you. So the Rebbe said, no, the answer is, when I wanted to show you, it was on my terms. You didn't look. Now you want to see it on your terms. That you cannot see. You cannot see me on your terms. Basically, the concept of Yediyas Hashlila, al derech. In other words, the only way to experience it is by experiencing through not looking, by complete suspension of your tools. But you can only do that after you've used your tools to see everything you can see. Then comes a point you could say, now I really get it. And that anyone who's ever come to any resonating truth knows the experience. First, you understand what you can, first you don't understand anything. Let's start with that. Then you start understanding, and step by step by step. Then comes a point where there's a certain epiphany that you become so one with the truth of the idea, it's not about you anymore. It's on a lower level, what they say, the difference between Chochmah and Bina. Bina says, I understand. Chochmah says, the idea is understood. I remember hearing from my mashpia, a melech, he said, Bina, the mensch nem de zach, and Chochmah, the zach nem de mensch. What's the difference? One, the person is grasping the idea, and the Chochmah, more bittul, the idea is grasping the person. Are you part of the higher truth, or are you grasping the truth, the higher truth? So basically, I would say the levels of Ratzon, it's still a little of I is in there, because God wants a relationship with you. Once you've gone through that level and you've reached the highest levels, exactly this, not just the determination. One second, not just pursuit, which is Ratzon HaGoli, not just Ratzon HaKodem, not just Ratzon HaGoli, but Ratzon HaKloli. the determination and the deliberation and all the way to the consideration. You're on that level where you're now just connecting to God, considering a relationship with you, but it's not about you. Then from there you can move to the next level where the you is ready to experience something beyond you. So it's not annihilation because the tzimtzum had happened and your kalim were cultivated and nurtured, but the child and the student has now become one with the teacher because he went through all the steps. That's how I would explain that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was great. I'm going to just say one final question. I know I'm used to taking time, but where you went to the second level, the level of deliberation, Shakla V'Tarya, and you said that it's really resonate. I think you used the term intuitive, because normally when you think of Shakla V'Tarya, God weighing his desire, this consideration to have a relationship with created, you would think that a human being thinks that would necessitate seichel, that Shakla V'Tarya is more than resignation. There would be some type of seichel involved, and how could there be seichel if you're only dealing on the levels of ratzon? Seichel hasn't even been created on in that level.
Well, that's why I have to refer you back to page where the Frierdiker Rebbe specifically addressed what you just asked. That is on page, where is it? 53, I think. Yeah, on page 53 and 54, he discussed that as well as here. The Shakla V'Tarya and Rotzen, even though he says clearly it's not in the intellectual Shakla V'Tarya, like a deliberation with ideas, because there's no tam v'das yet. You understand? This is all like keser haklali. This is rotzen makiv. You don't yet have chachma bina das. So this is a rotzen that's hard for us to fully relate to. That's why I mentioned that rotzen atzmi would be, let's say, in a human being, I have to think what would be a rotzen atzmi would be the love of children. He said parent and child, child and parent. L'mayla it's neshamas Yisrael and God and the neshamas Yisrael, the souls. The liberation on this level is not about a logical discussion. The deliberation seems to be more whether it's going to manifest in the determination. So in the case of L'mayla by Hashem, it's almost when we say that we say the Medrash says God asks Emes and Chesed, should I create existence? And Emes says no, because it's Aretz Malish Karim. The world is filled with lies. So Emes, the midah of truth, says no, don't create a world of lies. It's antithetical to Emes, to truth. Hashem says to Chesed, should I create the world? And Chesed says yes, because it's Aretz Mali Chsadim. The world will be filled with Chesed. People will do a lot of kindness. So the Medrash says Hashem takes Emes and throws it to the ground. Says Emes me'eretz titzmach, that I'm going to embed you into existence, into the eretz that you said was malish karim, and you will ultimately emerge. But I cannot create purely with Emes because the world is not a complete is a world of deception. And he used Chesed to create the world. So this is the deliberation. Did God not know that Chesed is going to create with Chesed? He has to ask Emes the question and realize that Emes is going to answer no. Or you have other times God consults with the angels and so on. So I would say deliberation here is not whether you're actually going to do it. It's more the deliberation of the process of how it's going to be done. But the key thing to remember that this is not the levels of Ratzon Gali. We're going to learn about this a little more soon. This is still all in that Ratzon Klali where there's consideration. So consideration, again, in Elikus is not considering it and maybe I'm not going to do it. It's not so much about that. It's more about consideration that it's coming into a gilui. Before consideration is just an atzmi. Consideration means you're leaving room for it. We're using the word consideration because lamata, by a nefesh, it works that way. You're considering the possibility of a relationship. In Lamaila, I would say it's the word consideration means that it's beginning, as I said, the stirring of the relationship. That's how I would explain it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Maybe this is a side point, but you mentioned earlier B'Shem Yer Mashpia, the Alter Rebbe in Perek Hey, he doesn't speak about Chachma and Bina per se, but he says, "Ari sichloi toifes umakef oisa, v'gam sichloi melubish bo oisa sho."
I wouldn't relate that to here because that's more of a, yeah, that may be the one second, let me correct myself. That may be the two sides, Chachma and Bina. It's possible.
He just speaks about Seichel.
Right. So seichel, either the seichel is grasping you or you're grasping the seichel. Right, I got it. In Perek Lamed Hey, in Tanya, there's a Hagah, there's a gloss there from the Alter Rebbe where he says, Shamaiti mirabeisai. Shamaiti mimeidi olav Hashem. They heard from the Magid that Chochmah, the Ein Sof, resides in Chochmah because Chochmah is hu levade ve'ein zolase. Because Chochmah is bittul, it senses a truth higher than itself, and that's why it's a keli for Ein Sof. That would be somewhat why Chochmah is that way. Bina is already the keli that I am relating to it. That's why you need both, because Chochmah is the resonating truth of the idea, and Bina is its integration and internalization in the person. Which again is, by the way, what we're talking now on a much lower level, an interface. You always need both. When you hear an idea, is it about you understanding it and getting it, or is it about a higher truth shining through you? You know, when they say being in the zone, are you a channel for a higher truth, or are you receiving a higher truth and it's becoming part of who you are? Both are necessary because one is bislapshus and pnimius, and the other one is you're relating to something greater. Remember, the mind in general allows us to access realities that are greater than our own identities. We can imagine, we can dream, we can aspire. Like I said before, we can learn Lifnei Tzimtzum and not be there. Your mind can go there, but your emotions and your being, maybe not. So the mind is actually a great instrument to lead us from level to higher level, because you can understand things and have idealism that's beyond your state of experience at this point. And that's exactly what the mind does. It leads you to greater places, then your emotions follow, and the journey continues higher and higher. I see it's already, wow, okay. You know what? This review is important. I'll tell you, I'm going to just say one thing about Mehusa Metzias, unless this is already, has this what's the word, short-circuited your circuits yet? Or you'd like me to add some more?
Please add.
Listen, as I said before, a teacher has to measure the students. I don't want to say things and just blow all the circuits, including my own. I should add. Okay. Okay, I'll say one thing about Mehusa Metzias. We're not going to learn inside today, just for the record. That's pretty obvious. But this was important to be able to then go back to the text and the context. So now there's another thing the Frierdiker Rebbe introduces: Mehusa Metzias, Mehusa Mehus, Metzias Mehus, Mehusa Metzias, and Metzias Metzias. So I'm laughing because it's very again abstract, and so I went. Let me tell you first my sources. I went to learn back in page. A while back, the Frierdiker Rebbe spoke about Mehusa Metzias on page 26 in Tzadik Dalet. The Rebbe cites there to look also in the Maimer of Rosh Hashanah, Tiku, Tovshin Aleph. That'll be 1940. Tovshin Aleph. Okay. There's another Maimer called Marav Tufcha, Pesach Maimer in Tofresh Tzadik Beis. It's 2 years before this Hemshech. Tzadik Beis would be 1932. So what I'm going to say is a understanding that based on the descriptions there. In both those Maimorim that I just mentioned, Tovshin Aleph, 1940, Rosh Hashanah 1940, and Pesach Tov 1932, The Frierdiker Rebbe explains Mehusa Mitzias, this concept. It's more at length. And being that the Tafris Tzadik Beis precedes this, I'm assuming he says you probably heard already the idea. So let me just explain what it is before we apply it to the discussion here. Because here he's using the terms quite liberally, and not really explaining it, which means that he's assuming we understand what it means, but it really throws you when you start reading it. What's Metzias HaMahus? What's Mahus HaMetzias? So he uses two examples that I'm going to give now in those Maimorim. One is, I'm going to use one example, thought and speech, and the second example is the soul and the body. Let's start with thought and speech. We know that there are four levels that break into two. Thought is when you're giving conscious thought to an idea. Speech is when you're expressing it to another person. Now, in a healthy process, you don't have speech preceding thought, except the drunk, which is why he speaks incoherently. But a regular person, first you think, and then you speak, right? So thought, you form the idea within your own thoughts, and then you express it in words, like I'm doing right now. But if you break it down, there's another thing called speech within thought and thought within speech. So essentially, you really have four levels: the thought within thought, the speech within thought, the thought within speech, and the speech within speech. The thought within thought is completely the abstract ideas that not necessarily even ready to express to another. The speech and thought means you're beginning to even speak to yourself, or in your mind, you're formulating words. This is how I'm going to express. I'm going to give a lecture or a talk, but it's still dibur sheba machshava. It's not machshava sheba machshava, but it's also not dibur. So it's the machshava, the thought has now entered into the stage of thought, of speech within thought. In other words, basically a structured formulation that's ready now to move to what? To the next level, which is the thought and speech. Because the machshava, the dibur sheb machshava, will then become the thought and the speech. Because when you speak, you're not just speaking words blindly; they're being guided and energized and directed by the thought. So when a person is speaking, you can break it down to two levels as well. There's the speech within speech, is the words I'm using. The thought in speech is the ideas that are being expressed through those words. So this is how he explains. Mahus HaMahus is the thought within thought. Metzias HaMahus is the dibur within thought. So it's now the mahus of the idea, the personality, the inner personality of the idea has now taken on some shape, but it's still Metzias of the mahus. It's all about the thought. It's not yet real speech. It's preparing to carry it to the next level of Metzias. So machshav is mahus, dibur is Metzias. The mahus HaMahus is thought and thought. The Metzias HaMahus is speech and thought. And now when you move to Metzias, which is the expression of the thought, you have mahus HaMetzias is the thought within speech. And the Metzias HaMetzias is the actual words that you're using. So there you have it. In a way, we learned something similar in volume 1 in Ayin Beis when he spoke about how the Oyer and a Keli join. So he said that the Oyer is Ayin, the Keli is Yesh. The Oyer is Bittel, completely only committed and dedicated to its source. The Keli is substance. How do they meet? So he says, because there's a Keli in the Oyer and there's an Oyer in the Keli. The Ayin of Oyer has a Yesh. It goes from Ayin to the Yesh of Oyer. And the Keli of the Yesh of Keli has an Ayin in that Yesh. So you have Ayin, Yesh, Yesh, Ayin, Yesh, Ayin, yes, Yesh, exactly. And there, that's how you make the connection. He gave the example there from the Gemara in Shabbos, Bameh Madlikin. What is a worthy wick? How do you light a candle, a flame? So we know a piece of metal, for example, cannot be lit. On the other hand, if you just light a flame and there's no wick, it won't burn either. So you need to have a wick that's conducive to a flame, whether made out of cloth, out of cotton, out of something that is conducive. So the wick on one hand is a keli, but it's a keli that has enough bittel, the ayin in the keli, that it's receptive to the oyer. And the oyer, on the other hand, can't just be an abstract light. It has to have a light that has within it the capacity to be contained by a container, by a wick. Okay, the second example is the soul and body. The soul, the neshama is the muhus of a person. The body is the mitzias of a person. As he says in Tafshin Aleph, the muhus is the gilui v'hafla shel hadavar, is the revelation and the grandeur, the quality of the thing. Quality. Mitzias, he says, is the hagbola, hagdore v'hagbola of the thing. It's the parameters and the structure. Basically, you could say a little like quality and quantity, if you wish. Now, in quality, there's an element of mitzias. And in quantity, there's an element of muhus. So the neshama is the spirit of the body, is the muhus. The body is the mitzias. But the neshama, to be able to go into a body, needs to have the mitzias of the muhus. The soul has to tahirihi. The soul has to prepare itself to fit into the body. If the soul remains completely removed, it will never connect with the body. The body, on the other hand, also has to have a bittul. For example, you put that soul in a piece of wood, you're not going to have a human being. You need a body that's shaped in a way that it's a keli, eyes, ears, a heart, a mind, arms, legs. A full body and all its organs and limbs are kalim to receive the neshama. So the pure neshama is muhus of muhus. The neshama as it relates to the body is mitzias of muhus. The body, which is mitzias, the body that relates to the soul, meaning it's receptive to the soul, is muhus ha-mitzias. And mitzias ha-mitzias is the actual physical body as we see it and know it. That is what he says there. Now, how do we apply it here? So he's basically saying that Rotzen has the same thing, has four things. Even though he doesn't specifically state all four, he really talks about the middle two and a little the top one, but I'm going to spell them out in all four because it's the only way to really fully understand it. The muhus of muhus has nothing to do with the Rotzen. It's to do with the person who's desiring. The etzem haneshama we talked about before. The etzem does not have any need for a relationship. Once it starts a consideration, then it becomes mitzias ha-muhus. And that's why the focus is on the muhus. The consideration is not thinking about the relation, the thing it's going to relate to. It's thinking about the soul's the consideration, leaving room, the possibility of a relationship. But it's now moved to mitzias ha-muhus to some extent, not completely, but it's begun the process of moving to mitzias ha-muhus. Once you talk about then comes the liberation, the termination. Then comes the second Ratzon. The Ratzon that is now pursuing and being drawn to the object. This one is focused on the object. It's focused on getting the desire met. It's not enough that the soul is considering a relationship. Now you need to get to achieve this relationship, you need to travel there. So the Ratzon now is a Ratzon called, because the actual desire being fulfilled is going to be the mitzias of the mitzias. So the Ratzon that pursues it is called the muhus of the mitzias. It's being informed by the mitzias of the muhus, the consideration, the deliberation, and the determination that are the mitzias of the muhus, that in turn is going to translate into the muhus of the mitzias, which is the pursuit and the being drawn to the mitzias of the Ratzon, which is the actual objective, what the desire wishes. That is, I believe, the way to explain this whole piece here. When we learn it inside, and we'll continue tomorrow, I'll explain it in the text. But if you read now yourself and use this explanation, it should help tremendously in understanding what he's talking about here. Obviously, I read the next page. You have to really go through the whole thing in detail because when you just read it and you don't step back, it becomes very complicated. So I hope this was helpful. So you consider this class as a review, but also obviously explanation. So before we conclude, so basically it's a review of the last few pages, basically 80 and 81. Anybody want to ask anything? It's also clear, okay. Or also unclear, which one is?
It's a nice review, Mr. Kaya.
Okay, so good. We're going to stop here. We continue tomorrow at 9:30. Remember, there's a WhatsApp group where we post all the recordings and also people can comment there. So just give us you could put it on the Zoom or just text us, and we will be happy to include you in the group. There you also have the texts of the discourses, and every day 9:30, and Sundays at 10 a.m. Okay,
Is
everybody.
it possible to put the link from tomorrow night on this WhatsApp group?
If someone can do it, let them do it. I told you where it is. Feel free to do it. It's at meaningfullife.com/world leaders. Right now, you'll have a trailer there, but tomorrow night we'll go up the whole thing. Yeah. So if someone doesn't mind, put it up. Fine, no, fine with me.